Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're tackling literally one of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked. Where did we come from? The source material we're digging into explores how our ultimate family tree deeply shapes our identity, our sense of human value, and really our underlying purpose. We're going to look closely at the evidence behind how beings capable of art, complex language, and spiritual reflection first appeared on Earth. It's a truly fascinating journey, so let's jump right in.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be walking through 5 key areas. First, 2 models of human origins. Second, re-examining the fossil record. Third, genetics and human uniqueness. Fourth, historical impacts of evolutionary theory. And finally, the biblical creation model.
All right, Section 1, 2 models of human origins.
To set the stage, the text defines 2 fundamentally different explanations for human existence. On one side, we have the evolution model. This relies on undirected natural processes and macroevolution from a common ancestor. Basically, this inherently predicts a gradual chain of transitional fossils over millions of years. On the flip side, the creation model posits purposeful design, the idea that humans were intentionally created by an intelligent creator. Scientifically speaking, this model carries the expectation of a sudden appearance of fully formed humans right there in the historical record. Moving right along to Section 2, re-examining the fossil record.
So, when transitioning to the physical evidence, the source material actually challenges that neat ladder-like march of progress imagery we've all seen in textbooks. Instead of undeniable transitions from ape to human, the analysis categorizes these famous discoveries into very distinct groups. You've got fully formed humans like Neanderthals and Homo erectus. You have extinct apes like Artie and Lucy. And then you have what researchers playfully call a muddle in the middle. Fragmented fossils like Homo habilis that are incredibly difficult to classify with any real certainty. To understand why this muddle exists, just look at this striking quote from British scientist Lord Solly Zuckerman. He noted that because fossil evidence is often so fragmentary, we're sometimes talking about a single piece of a skull or jawbone, researchers are forced to move beyond objective evidence. The text points out that when data is limited, subjective interpretation and speculation begin to play a massive role in how these evolutionary family trees are drawn.
Building on that, we see a remarkably candid admission from paleoanthropologist David Pilby. He suggested that researchers studying human origins might sometimes feel as though they are, in his words, flailing about in the dark. The text argues here that theoretical models and pre-existing assumptions frequently drive the interpretation of these scarce fragments, rather than the fossils just telling a clear story all on their own.
Which brings us to Section 3, genetics and human uniqueness.
If the fossil record is as heavily debated as the text suggests, where do we look next? Modern DNA analysis. And the crucial takeaway here is this absolutely massive number, 99.9%. The source emphasizes that any 2 people on Earth are more than 99.9% genetically identical. Rather than representing widely separated evolutionary branches, this extraordinary similarity is used by the text to argue that all humanity actually descends from one relatively small, closely related ancestral family.
Modern genetics is also completely rewriting some very old assumptions. For over a century, Neanderthals were depicted as primitive, hunched ape men, right? But recent DNA extraction proves Neanderthals and modern humans actually interbred, with many of us carrying 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA today. Because different species normally can't mate and produce fertile offspring, the source claims this forces a total reclassification. It suggests Neanderthals were a distinct, biologically compatible human population, not some distant evolutionary ancestor.
Beyond just our DNA, the text points out several traits that completely separate humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. I mean, we aren't just surviving out there. We use complex language, we engage in abstract reasoning, create art and music, possess a deep moral awareness, and have a unique spiritual consciousness. The really vital question posed by the presentation here is, did these extraordinary, non-survival-based capacities just slowly evolve by chance, or do they signify intentional design?
Let's pivot a bit for Section 4, historical impacts of evolution. Now we shift our focus from biology to history, examining how these theories profoundly impacted society. Looking at the timeline, in 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, followed by The Descent of Man in 1871, which directly applied his theories to humans. This created a massive cultural clash between traditional biblical views and Darwinian evolution.
This tension ultimately boiled over into the highly publicized 1925 Scopes trial, broadcasting the deep divide live on the radio to the entire American public.
The text then explores the darker societal applications of these early theories. Using an observation from Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, the presentation argues that 19th century evolutionary frameworks actually provided a pseudo-scientific justification for biological determinism. Gould noted that biological arguments for racism increased by orders of magnitude after evolutionary theory was widely accepted, simply because some populations were wrongfully categorized as more advanced than others.
So the historical takeaway here is that evolutionary language, words like struggle, selection, and survival of the fittest, was historically used by some to rationalize social hierarchies, forced sterilization laws, and eugenics movements. The source argues that viewing humanity merely as the product of unguided, competitive natural processes historically weakened the moral foundation for inherent human equality.
And that brings us to our final part, Section 5, the biblical creation model.
Having examined the evolutionary model and its historical impact, the presentation now outlines the alternative. The text contrasts the hierarchical interpretations of early evolutionary thought with the biblical worldview. According to this perspective, all humans descend from one original pair. The argument is that because every single person shares the exact same origin, the exact same human nature, and inherent value before a creator, creationism provides a much stronger historical and moral foundation for human equality and dignity. The script actually breaks down what it means to be created in the image of God into a three-step framework of profound purpose. First, humanity was intentionally designed for relational fellowship, not isolation. Second, humans were given the unique ability to create new life in that same image. And third, they were entrusted to be active stewards and caretakers of the world. It elevates human existence far beyond mere biological survival.
The source highlights this specific scriptural quote to contrast the concept of blind natural forces with a narrative of deep personal care. The Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The overarching theme the text is emphasizing here is intention, a creator actively forming humanity and seeking a direct, personal relationship with his creation.
Which brings us to the ultimate question posed by the source material. When you look at the complexities of the fossil record, the undeniable unity found in our genetics, and the profound uniqueness of human consciousness, you really have to ask, are we simply the accidental result of blind natural forces over millions of years? Or are we intentional beings whose ancestry traces directly back to a creator? It's a highly provocative thought that sits at the very core of our identity, leaving us to weigh the evidence and explore the true meaning of our own origins.